Hi, I'm Tim, guitar player, teacher. In the last couple of videos, we discussed diatonic harmony. This involved the construction and analysis of the chords made by harmonizing the major and minor scales. Now, I said at the end of that last video that the next one would be discussing melodic composition. However, I once again changed my mind. For some reason, I apparently thought I was done talking about harmony for the time being. I was wrong. There are some concepts found in harmony that directly apply to melodic composition, so I thought I would spend a little more time on harmony before we moved into melody writing. On that note, in this video, we're going to be looking at harmonic function and cadences. Harmonic function basically refers to a chord's placement within the diatonic setting of a key signature. It defines the chord's role within a harmonic progression. Looking at, or rather listening to, the notes of a major scale, certain pitches are more active than others. They seem to have more tension or energy than the rest. This tension creates a feeling of anticipation trying to push us forward. Alternately, there are some notes that are more stable. They seem to create a feeling of rest. The tension created by the active notes is resolved by moving to a more stable note. Harmonic progressions rely on the building and resolution of this tension. The most stable note within a key is the tonic. It's the starting place for the scale and will always create a feeling of rest within any diatonic setting. The most active note is the leading tone. It will always create a feeling of tension that, as its name implies, is trying to lead us somewhere, specifically back to the tonic. To demonstrate this, listen to this simple melody. It ends on the supertonic. Notice how it sounds incomplete. It sounds like it's trying to push us forward. Now listen to the same melody with the leading tone added as the last note. It sounds a great deal more conflicted, like it desperately needs to move somewhere. There is a lot of tension left unresolved. Now let's add the tonic to the end. It's very easy to hear how the tonic resolves the tension of the leading tone. The melody now sounds complete and meets our expectations much better. Here's a chart that shows the level of tension or stability for each of the notes of the major scale and how they should resolve. As a general rule, the more unstable a note or chord is, the more stability is needed to resolve it. So the two most active tones, the leading tone and the subdominant, each move to the most stable tones, the tonic and the mediant, respectively. It is no coincidence that these two pairs of notes, the leading tone to the tonic and the subdominant to the mediant, are where we find the half steps within our major scale. It is these half steps that create the strongest sense of tension and resolution within the scale. Also, notice that each active note resolves to an adjacent scale tone. 7 resolves to 1, 4 resolves to 3, and 6 resolves to 5. Chromatic tones create even more tension and for the most part always resolve to a diatonic tone a half step away. Looking at the scale tones of each of the major diatonic chords, we can start to see which chords are more active or more stable by simply finding the notes of each chord on the stability chart. Put simply, the more active the notes of a chord are, the more active the chord will be. The more stable the notes of a chord are, the more stable the chord will be. The most stable chord is, not surprisingly, the tonic triad. It includes the three most stable notes of the scale, the tonic, the mediant, and the dominant. Alternately, the most active chord would be either the dominant 7 chord or the leading tone triad. These are the only two diatonic chords that use both the leading tone and the subdominant. In each case, the most active notes would resolve to the most stable ones. This is why in common practice music, the 5 chord or the 7 chord will most often progress to the tonic. This overall concept of tension leading to resolution is fundamental to good harmonic composition and is where the function or the role of a chord is derived. There are 3 groups or families of harmonic function: tonic, subdominant, and dominant. The 1 chord and the 6 chord have a tonic function. The 1 chord is made up of the 3 most stable scale tones, the 1, 3, and the 5, and the 6th chord is made up of the two most stable tones, the 1 and the 3, and one moderately active tone, the 6. This makes these two chords each rather stable. The 2 chord and the 4 chord each function as subdominant chords. These two chords each have two of the more active notes, the 4 and the 6, making each of them somewhat active. Since the 4 chord contains the tonic of the scale, it tends to be slightly less active than the 2 chord, but this is not enough to overcome the tension of the other two chord tones. The 5 chord and the 7 chord each function as dominant chords. As I mentioned earlier, they each contain the most active note, and in the case of the dominant 7 chord, the two most active notes. They create a great deal of tension and need to be resolved by the most stable chords. Notice the mediant chord is not listed. It contains both the 3 and the 5, two rather stable tones, but also the 7, the most active tone. This causes the chord's function to vary greatly based on a number of things, including whether or not the chord is inverted, which scale tone is doubled in the voicing, and which chords it is surrounded by. We'll discuss the varying functions of this chord a little more later. The tonic chords are the most stable and are, therefore, most often found in two places. They often begin a progression to set the key and end the progression to resolve tension. The dominant chords are the most active and are therefore used to create the tension that sets up the tonic chords. The subdominant chords are used as transitional chords. They are most often found between the initial tonic chord and the dominant and help bridge the gap between them. For this reason, they're often referred to as predominant chords. This arrangement of chord functions, tonic to predominant to dominant to tonic, is very common and will be seen often. The function of a chord is not set in stone, though. Its function can be affected by a number of other factors. First, inverting the chord can affect its function. As a general rule, the more a chord is inverted, the more its function is altered. Also, the voicing of the chord. In 4-part harmony, for example, the notes of a triad can only account for 3 of the voices, so one of the chord tones must be doubled. Which note is doubled can have a profound effect on the overall tension created by the chord and therefore how it's perceived to function. The melody and the bass line of the piece also have a lot to say in regards to making these voicing decisions, but overall the intended function of the chord should always be considered. 7th chords can also function differently than triads. Adding a 7th to any chord will add a great deal of tension due to the close interval between the 7th and the root, and will therefore also have a large effect on its perceived function. All of this leads us to try and arrange our chords into progressions that create a feeling of tension or energy, followed by a feeling of resolution or rest. The most common harmonic progression endings that achieve this goal are called cadences. Put simply, a cadence is a conclusion of a phrase. It can be rhythmic, melodic, or harmonic. However, here we are specifically talking about harmonic cadences. There are 4 basic types of harmonic cadences: authentic, plagal, deceptive, and half. For each example, I'll play the same phrase with minor adjustments to demonstrate each cadence in both a major and a minor key. An authentic cadence uses the 5 chord to build tension that is then resolved by the 1 chord. This is the strongest and most common harmonic cadence in common practice music. The additional tension of the tritone in the dominant 7 chord can and often is used to enhance the pull towards the tonic. Any voicing of the chords can be used in an authentic cadence. However, there is a very specific version of an authentic cadence that stands out. It is called a perfect authentic cadence. In a perfect authentic cadence, both chords must be in root position, and the tonic chord must have the root doubled in the soprano voice. This creates a perfect interval between the bass and the soprano, thus the name. Quite often, the leading tone will be in the soprano of the 5 chord, creating movement from the most active scale tone to the most stable in the melody. However, this is not necessary. Any voicings that do not meet these conditions is called an imperfect authentic cadence. There is one other addition though. A cadence using the leading tone triad instead of the 5 chord is also considered an imperfect authentic cadence. This is because the leading tone triad is basically functioning as a dominant 7 without the root. A plagal cadence uses the subdominant to create the tension before resolving to the tonic. This is not as strong a cadence as the authentic, but is still very effective. It's often called the church cadence or the Amen cadence because it is traditionally found at the end of a hymn. The chords can be in any voicing, although the root positions, like always, are strongest. A deceptive cadence is a cadence where the dominant chord is unexpectedly resolved to the submediant, the other tonic function chord, instead of the tonic. The surprise of not hearing the 1 chord follow the 5 chord is the source of its name. A half cadence is any cadence that ends on the dominant. As we can imagine, ending on the dominant leaves a great deal of tension unresolved. It sounds very inconclusive and is found in the middle of a melody. It can be thought of like a question being asked and must be followed by a stronger, more conclusive cadence to provide the answer. There are many ways a half cadence can be approached. The important part is that it ends on the 5 chord. There's a very specific version of a half cadence that only occurs in minor keys called a Phrygian half cadence. A Phrygian half cadence uses a first inversion minor subdominant followed by the root position dominant chord. This creates a half-step movement in the bass from the submediant to the dominant, which is very characteristic of the Phrygian mode with its minor second interval, thus the name. So here's a summary of these basic cadences. It's important that I point something out here. As I've said several times throughout this series, music is an art form. And while it is very important to be able to identify and accurately create these harmonic concepts, there are no objective truths about what makes music good versus bad or right versus wrong. The conventions that I talk about in this series are not steadfast rules that must be followed. In fact, in modern music, many of these rules are not followed at all. However, they are and have been very commonly used over the last several centuries by composers of all stripes and should therefore be learned. As we get further into part writing and composition, they will regularly be referred to and used to explain many of the concepts that we discuss. They also provide the basis for training our ears to be able to hear chord progressions accurately and be able to reproduce the harmonies and melodies that we imagine, so they become a fundamental part of the creative process as well. Now that we have some basic guidelines for how chord progressions are organized, we need to start putting this to use and look more specifically at how the notes of these chords should be arranged to create smooth, flowing harmonies within the different parts of a typical piece. This is called part writing, and it's what our next video will begin to cover. Until then, thanks for watching. I hope this video was helpful in some way. If you're interested in private lessons, check out my website at twrgtr.com. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and don't forget to subscribe to continue learning more about music theory. Thanks again, and take care.